Hey, practice owners, on this episode, you're going to hear about how Medicare payment reimbursement is now possible, even via text message. We're going to get into remote therapeutic monitoring and much, much more with today's guest, Steven Coen from Sarah Health. You can check them out online at sarahealth.io. So that's www.sarahealth.io. And I'm Dave Kittle, owner of Concierge Pain Relief Home Physical Therapy in the New York City area, and the CEO of the Fieldmaker Group. We're currently speaking with practice owners about partnering or acquiring some or all of their practice. If that sounds like you, feel free to reach out. Steven, welcome to the show. What's going on?
Dave, thanks for having me. We might be making your job a little bit tougher at the Fieldmaker, but I hope you'll be able to get over that over the course of the conversation.
So, how so? We can start right there. How so? Because I'm going to have to pay more if there's some practices using what we're going to talk about tonight.
Well, I would imagine based on what we've seen, you'll see higher top line numbers and definitely healthier net income, right? And so thinking about that magical EBITDA number and the multiple you're paying on that, as we've seen practices be able to increase that with the steady patient volume. So not even increasing patient volume. Obviously, that makes for more interesting discussions, not only during year-end time when you get to help out your staff a little bit, but also when it comes time to exiting the business.
Awesome. So we'll come back to that. Give the audience a little bit of a background, little bio of yourself and Sarah Health, and then we'll kind of get into remote therapeutic monitoring, Medicare reimbursement, how practices can actually get revenue, get reimbursement without the Medicare beneficiary being in person, without doing a telehealth call with them, without going to their home. That's a little bit of a hook. Let's get a little bit of a bio and your background.
Absolutely. I'll keep it short on me. I'm a frustrated patient. So I've had a lot of physical therapy, blowing up my shoulder, ACL meniscus. And then my first job out of college was at Deloitte Consulting, which being out of Kansas City meant I was on about 150 to 200 flights a year, and then in a chair for about 16 to 18 hours a day. So if there was a prescription for musculoskeletal pain, right, that might be one of the things to tie together. So I've always enjoyed my time in the clinic as a patient. So whether that be with Larry, with Hope, with Dr. Tim, like with Greg, it's been amazing care, but the lack of continuity between visits just drove me insane. And so I didn't have healthcare experience before starting Sarah Health with my co-founders. So one was he's a master's of data science and computer science from UCLA. The other, our head of clinical, has been been at the Mayo Clinic for about a decade, and so it's the trio that started the company, and we launched about 2018, right? So that's when a couple others in the RTM and broadly some of that have gone the HEP route, right, launched, and we had this just complete driving desire to do something amazing for patients and clinicians. And we just didn't think the home exercise piece was there. No, what we're really trying to solve is the lack of continuity and the engagement in between visits. Now, back in 2018, when you could only get paid for your in-person visits, there wasn't a market for us in the fee-for-service world, which the vast majority of owners are in. But some, especially these groups that were on site at high-risk employers like firefighters, so we had thousands of firefighters on the platform, and it was all about engagement, right? It wasn't, did you deliver exercises? Did you have continuing education? Did you do MEPS? Like, none of that mattered. It was, did people engage with your platform in any way, shape, or form? And when we had the web application for them and a portal, right? It just, we were getting maybe somewhere in like the 10 to 15% each day, not great. And so we, not having any sort of, chains on us and being able to experiment, we decided to experiment with text messages. And what we found was if you could get someone to respond, the likelihood they would go do their exercises was extremely high. And so when we started testing this, we were inside fire departments, stations in particular, and we would watch the message go out, and you would watch as the people, like firefighters, would respond to it and almost Pavlovian go and do their exercises. And we asked them, like, well, why? There's nothing in there about your exercise, or there may not be. Maybe it's an adherence question, maybe it's not. But even for a question about pain, right? That patient reported outcome of pain, like, oh, well, you asked me how my pain was, and I had to answer like it's a little higher than it should be. And then I went to do my exercises. And so we I wouldn't say perfected, but gosh, put thousands of patients through it, spent thousands of hours on the product, both clinically and not. And then when the RTM codes came out last year, we're just like, this is what we've been doing. Like, we've been doing this, and I think there's a misconception that it has to be home exercises, and there is nothing in that code, that CPT code, that says days of data exchange of home exercises, right? It is just days of data exchange. So in our opinion, it's not a HEP thing. It is an engagement code. Like, that's all that matters. That's what you get paid for. And so we were right place, right time to be able to go into it with something that's different than what else is out there. It's not right for everybody, but for the folks that have used it, we've seen some pretty amazing stories already, and hope to make a few hundred or thousand or 100,000 more.
Yeah, awesome. When you and your team were getting some of that initial feedback of the firefighters actually receiving the SMS, the text message, and then performing some of their exercises, was that they were verbally or telling you that was the result, or you guys happen to be there on site for some of this? I just want to clarify that component.
Yeah, so both. I guess the third is, we also, the PT group that we sold into would also tell us, like, this is crazy. Like, they're getting it and then going and doing it. So that's, it was all three. We did some of it on site, some of it was word of mouth, but a lot of it was after we left, and the PTs that were on site, like, they knew when the text message came in, because they would see movement.
Got it. So the reason why this is a little unique, and I'm glad, like, you reached out on LinkedIn. I'm like, hey, I got to get you on the show, because I think there's a lot of other remote therapeutic monitoring, like, platforms and softwares out there where the user, the Medicare beneficiary, or the whoever is holding whatever insurance, or whoever the company's partnering with, the employer, typically, I believe the user has to log into some portal, some dashboard, whatever. Like, they have to log into an app on computer, laptop, software, on their phone, whatever it might be. And
Yep.
And Sarah Health's complete value proposition of what the patient or the client sees is just through text message, correct?
Correct. No app download, no app download, no app download. I feel like I have to say it 3 times at least in every demo and every conversation. No app download. And that's, it's, if they can receive text messages, whether it's a flip phone or an iPhone or anything in between, it doesn't matter. And that was, part of the firefighter experience was, we found, depend upon the station, but between 12 and 15% of firefighters are on flip phones, or at least they were back in 2018, 2019. And so that was a big reason for us to test different low friction options, was because we were forced to. And thank goodness we were, is the most blessed obstacle we got thrown at us.
Yeah. So can you screen share? You have something queued up for an example of the text message. So practice owners watching or listening out there, if you were to use something like this, or you reach out to Steven and you get a demo, this right here, and if you're watching, if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, you'll have to jump over to the YouTube. Steven is sharing an example of a screen share of this text message. The text message says, hey, Tom, how much time do your exercises take to complete? ? Too long, too short, or just right? Reply, long, short, or right. And then, then there'll be other questions. They'll be up. So that's your favorite question, and why?
It's our Goldilocks question, right? And it's really 2 data points there. Now, they could lie, right, and say, oh, it's just right, and they're not doing it at all. But the likelihood that someone is going to take the effort to lie is low. So not only do you really get an adherence kind of like bonus answer data point on this, but also just, hey, does it fit that patient's life, right? As a patient, I've been in that appointment where I have not wanted to tell my physical therapist, like, you gave me 7 exercises. I'm not going to do all these. There's no way I'm going to, but you're so confident in it that, like, I'm going to listen to, like, almost like a barrage, like, okay. And then I leave, and, like, there's no way. We also get some really, really cool stories from this one, in particular when people are traveling on vacation, have a life event, whatever, and we'll get, too long, I'm on vacation. Perfect. Can you at least do one of like just do this stretch? And then you're not losing a week, right? As both a clinician and a patient, you're able to at least like maintain the recovery that you've established and not potentially regress. So I love that. I love this question.
Yeah. And the second example, sending to a current patient or client in your practice. Hi, Tom, consistency is key to making progress. Were you able to complete all your exercises today? ? Reply yes or no. Now, in the pre-interview, I had asked you what happens if the patient, the Medicare beneficiary, does not reply, if they do not text back. What is that then? Is that still billable and Medicare will pay for it either way? Or what's the scenario here?
So if they don't respond for at least 16 days in a 30-day period, it is not billable. So that magical code that honestly our business runs on is CPT code 98977, which stipulates that the practitioner must supply a device, which in our case is a software as a medical device, and that patient has to have 16 days of data exchange. So that's not 16 responses, it's a response in 16 unique days in a 30-day period. And so that's the rule, and that's what we run in. If people don't respond, if patients don't respond, then you can't bill for it. We also don't charge you. We can get into our business model later, but that's it.
Got it. So in that example, if that were a Medicare beneficiary, they were applied once in 16 days, whatever the period.
Yep.
Then how do you help the practice, or then the practice has to then add a CPT code in their EMR? Because as far as I know, Sarah Health, you're separate from any medical record, right? So what's the juggling there? Do you coach? Do you send something automated to the practice owner or the therapist? Like, make sure you build this code for whatever this occurrence or this incidence of completion of the, like they check the box of now you can build this code for RTM. How does that go?
Yeah, so how it goes is once a patient is fully billable, and I'll get to why that's important, fully billable, we generate documentation that generate documentation for that patient, for that PT, that's copy and pastable into typically the assessment portion of their note with the exact CPT codes that are billable. So it's full documentation that's copy and pastable. We've done a medical policy review of all the major insurance company, all the major payers, United, a bunch of the Blues plans, Humana, Aetna, Anthem. I think it's Anthem's that's the most stringent, and as you can imagine, most of the Blues also use that as their model. And so our documentation that we auto-generate for clinicians meets that threshold, and has, as we've seen, meets the other payers as well. So as long as you can copy paste, then that's it. I'll tease that something more is coming that we're doing a proof of concept on right now. That would be even less ask, but it's not quite ready yet.
Got it. So in that example, if that text message gets the Medicare beneficiary replies to it, your system generates that copy and paste component that then the therapist copies from your system into the EMR, and the CPT code that you mentioned. Approximately what is that reimbursement for that one interaction?
For the one interaction, I mean, technically zero for the one interaction, assuming they respond for 16 times or more in that 30-day period. And like that's the key. So they accumulate at least 16 days of responses in that 30-day period. Medicare, the national average for that code of 98977 is $57. You're also, for that first month, you're going to be at a bill for 98975, which is an education code. So did you educate the patient on how to use the device, which for us is like text back. Pretty relatively simple. And Medicare pays $19 for that. We've seen we've seen that be more or less the floor outside of some Medicaid plans. So a lot of the Medicaid plans will be 10, 15% below that. And we've seen multiple Medicaid plans like Georgia, Colorado, I believe Texas off the top of my head, Medicaid is paying for these codes as well. On the commercial side, we've seen everything from basically being at parity with Medicare to even for that 98977, which Medicare pays 57, we've seen some payers with some of our customers be at $100 plus. So they're paying a lot for that engagement, which makes a ton of sense when you run, and we can walk through the ROI on it as well. We've looked into this, but as a payer, it makes complete sense, right? And even as Medicare, I think we talked about this in a prior conversation, but why would Medicare pay for this? Like, is this a gift to us? Because as clinicians, and I'm not one, but as clinicians, collectively, we've been doing all of this before, right? We've been staying in contact with our patients in between appointments. We've been checking in on them. We've been answering the calls, answering the text messages, answering the emails. Like, is this a gift from Medicare? I don't think so at all. Not at all. But that's a good thing, because a gift would make me think it's a charity, and charities are harder to run than a self-sustaining incentivized business, right? And so if I'm Medicare, I'm looking at my two biggest health risks, falls and loneliness. Okay, well, if physical therapy helps people move better, they should fall less, or at least have less severe injuries from a fall. There's also, I think it directly relates to loneliness, because I mean, if you can't leave your house comfortably, you're not going to, you're forcing people to come to you. I think social isolation, I don't think it's a hard logical leap to make, but let's keep it the falls and just say it costs 40 grand for Medicare for an injury producing fall. If I'm Medicare and I'm saying, okay, that's $40,000. Let's just say that on average, I'm paying $200 per patient per year in remote therapeutic monitoring costs, right? So $200. Well, if I think that RTM software, as well as the other incentives to promote better engagement and adherence outside the clinic, will result in a better outcome and a lower fall risk, I only have to be right 1 out of every 200 times to say, oh, well, I at least came out even. I spent 40 grand on RTM across 200 patients, and I avoided one of those falls. And so now I'm even. If I can go 2 for 200 or 1 for 100, I'm in the money. Like, this is sweet, right? That's a casino game you want to play all day, every day. So that's where we think this is not a gift. The numbers just, it doesn't make sense why it would be. It's cold hard, just logic and dollars, which again, I think is actually more beneficial and gives credence to why we think these codes will be around for a while, and they're not going away.
Sure. Got it. If there's a Medicare beneficiary going to a brick and mortar office, let's say they're being seen 2 times a week, will Medicare also still pay for this service and all of this during the plan of care? They don't have to be discharged or anything like that?
And no, in fact, I'd say almost the opposite. Once you discharge, it's game over. So you can't bill once that active plan of care is ended and you discharge that patient, it's over. You can't bill for RTM anymore. So it's definitely during an active care plan. What we have seen is practices starting to adjust their visit cadence a little bit, to where instead of it being, hey, 12 visits, 6 weeks, twice a week for 6 weeks, right? It's, okay, we're still going to do twice a week, but for the first 3 weeks. And then we might move to weekly and basically like extend out once the patient gets out of that more immediate pain. And so that way they give their body, honestly, a little bit more time to actually make the more systemic changes. That's going to take longer. And so that's what we've started to see and hear about is some extended care plans that may or may not have the same amount of visits. And so that way, and RTM being like that buffer throughout, or that foundational like engagement layer.
Got it. So that's a good distinction. I'm glad that I asked that, because this is a bill. I just thought it was like during the continuum of any calendar year. So whether they have an active plan of care or not. So good that we cleared that up. So it is only during the active plan of care. What are some of those other caveats around the ability for this to occur? So that's one. That's a big one, which is once the Medicare beneficiary has a formal discharge, then this will not, you cannot bill them. Now, I know you mentioned in another conversation that we had about maybe sending them text messages to kind of reactivate them and maybe get them back in the clinic or something like that. But that component would not be billable. So what are some other things? And I know we're going to get to the return on investment calculator. You're going to share your screen on that. We'll get into some other things about your payment model, how much does it cost, the business model, all that. What are some of the other caveats, though, that would like trip up practice owners, or things that they can, hear now that kind of shortcut their success in learning about this in a quick way?
Yeah. I think one, like, it doesn't have to be home exercise data. Like, it doesn't have to be that, right? It can be broadly patient-reported outcomes. Two, and this is more of the implementation phase, but we get this a lot, where we get an angry email, typically around day 20 to 21 after we onboard a new practice. And for that CPT code 98977, it has to be 16 days of data exchange in a 30-day period. So we get like that 20 day, like, hey, you haven't given me my documentation yet. It's like, we can't bill it yet. Like 30 days has to elapse, and then we'll give it to you. So that, I think, if we're being honest, be ready for just some denials and some claims management as these payers are still, getting their systems in place to be able to handle it. So we've seen issues and helped some of our clients where they've they've gotten it denied because it was an incorrect provider, and we've had to go help them like with an appeal. Like, no, it is absolutely correct. Like, it's a physical therapist, it's a qualified healthcare provider. So that we've had some insurance companies that we've had to help our clients go back and say, this does not count as a visit. This is not a visit. Like, this should not count it towards the visit cap. And so I think it would be disingenuous of me to say it's all hunky dory, everything just works, and right, it would be BS. So that's it's going to happen. Your EMR is almost assuredly going to have the capability to do this. They're going to, or they can add in the CPT codes, especially at this point. So that shouldn't be a concern. Those are some of the trip ups. Then trip ups on the more like the mechanics of it. Then as a practice owner, be ready to spend some social or leadership capital in doing this, or create an incentive structure. And we have some ideas on that, what we've seen work well and not well. But and also like where you meet, right? If you don't compensate versus you do, and how to think about all that math. But I think it's looking. We have a bit of a playbook for practice owners, right? And how to handle the objections, how to think about the rollout. It's as much of a people thing as it is a technology or insurance or anything else. So those are a few of the, I guess, the watch outs, and some things I'd advise private practice owners on as they embark on this journey.
Got it. One more thing before we jump into the ROI, the return on investment calculator. With with the text message that you showed on the screen, across the normal other industries and niches, like for example, my dentist uses that for confirming appointments, right? So you got to text back, the letter C or the letter Y for yes, or just like yes or something like C. I think a couple of different dentists have used something like that with me in Brooklyn. Yep. In that case, it's like yes, I'm confirming a visit, but I don't have to do anything physical. We all know that there's a huge problem with people actually being compliant and adherent to their home exercise program. It's great that you already have some preliminary data that it actually moves people to do this. And I guess at the end of the day, you don't fully know all these practices, all the patients and all these practices that you guys work with. You don't really know if the person actually moved or did any exercise at all. It's really about them replying. So there is some engagement. Even if they're texting back, they could be lying, like you said. They could be just replying just to get it over with. But I guess some of this around this whole offering is like, if someone's going to reply, then it's almost like there's some influence there that they might actually take action that day, the next day, in the general time to actually do their home exercise program, and or make sure that they don't cancel or no-show their visits, and actually complete their plan of care to get the results that they're looking for at their physical therapy office or the local practice if they're coming to them. So there's really no proof that the person actually moves or does their exercises, but there is that, right? Or your face.
So
You don't have
yes
any
and no.
wearable. You don't have any
Yes.
wearable.
True. I'd say the reason I say yes and no is and this is self-reported as well, but right now our patients report basically a 65% home exercise adherence rate based on, again, they could be lying. Now, we
I know, but like across the U.S., everyone's, no one says that they're overweight. Like, come on.
Yeah, fair. So what we've seen in the data in terms of photo scores, and so we've done an analysis and it's small right now, so it's less than 100 patients at one practice, looking at basically non-Sera and Sera patients. And what we've seen is that the patients on Sera are typically getting to the same outcome trajectory within fewer visits. So
that and that's what really matters, as opposed to, did they do every rep of every exercise every day for their home exercise program?
And so that's what we're seeing. That would like, okay, well, if the only difference is Sera in that population at a high level, right? And again, we'll have to do a bigger one, but if that's really like the only difference, then they must be doing something. Or is it simply they just feel more connected with their therapist and they feel like there's more value in the therapy that they're receiving, and like that is causing them to some other life. There's all sorts of stuff there, right? But yeah, to your point, at the end of the day, hey, if my photo scores are going from X to Y in fewer visits with Sera than without it, maybe I don't know exactly what it is, but I want to play this game.
And payers will potentially, they're going to care more about the photo scores, not, do all these patients have a wearable where we're able to see like an increase in, heart rate, that they were actually more likely to be performing their home exercise program. And they're, at certain times with an increase of heart rate during that time. That would be like the insane, follow through on the actual exercise. But it's really about the holistic 30,000 foot view of like their photo scores and reaching the results and improving outcomes.
That's it.
Got it. Okay, so let's go ahead and share the screen. Let's look at the return on investment calculator. I know you showed it to me briefly. I saw some graphics and charts. Again, if you're watching on iTunes or Spotify, jump over to the YouTube Dave Kittle Show on YouTube, and we're going to look at some data, especially if you're a practice owner. These are the types of things that will hopefully move the needle for you.
And so what we've got here is our typical setup. So, and maybe the Medicare is a little high for this one. So you do 40 and do 60 here. And so 10 clinician practice, that's doing about, call it like 6 evals a week per clinician. No timed code. So I know we haven't even gotten into the CPT codes 9980, 9981. We don't show that in our ROI model because that's on practices to do, and we only show things that we do, and that's our thought process. A little bit novel. I think a lot of people depend on the time codes. I don't touch it. I think it's disingenuous because you're asking for workflow changes, all sorts of other stuff. Anyway, so that for 10 clinicians doing about 6 evals a week. And then what you're looking at for that practice is another $280,000 to the top line. But what's probably even more exciting for them is 190 to the bottom line. And that's after paying their therapist more. So we kind of teased a little bit of what some compensation structures look like that we've seen in our practices. So we've seen everything from no compensation addition to, I'd say at the farthest end is, the pure RVU, eat what you kill models, right? Where they just make extra units on this as they bill it. And one thing we found be simple and seen some good success and like people grasp it really easily is a $10 per billable patient per month bonus to the therapist. So therapist, you get your patients to engage, I'll give you $10 per month that they engage. Simple, it's trackable, like super easy. And so that has seemed to resonate really, really well with folks. And then our business model, and don't really care who else is watching this. We charge $15 per billable patient per month. which means in that example where that person never responded, guess what? As a practice owner, you're not going to pay for that, because that puts us with a heavy incentive to figure out why. And if that's our business, it should be us figuring it out, not you, the practice owner. So that's our business model. That's it. Not a lot of bells and whistles on it, but we prefer to keep everything simple as possible.
Got it. So on, and maybe we can come back to it or you can answer it later, but I've heard that maybe some owners have considered having one of their therapists engage with RTM as opposed to adding this as like an offering. And, I don't know, some therapists maybe don't really care about an extra $10 here or there. Maybe that doesn't really, if it's potentially more work, I don't know, like, is it more work so the therapist that you gave the example of, like an extra $10 for this, what would they be doing? Or what are some of the things more of, like, is it that initial setup? Because I think, as far as I understand, all of the rest of the text messages being sent to the Medicare beneficiary or the patient is coming automatically daily from your platform, and the therapists are not sending those, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
What is the one example of a therapist being compensated with some bonus per completion of a task? Like, is that more of like the initial setup of getting the patient onto this platform, or like getting them onto this idea to engage with?
So for that, it's definitely when they become billable for that first month. But yeah, the ask is pretty light on the therapist, like onboard patient and review messages as needed. So we have an automatic, system that classifies messages into standard or non-standard responses. And if anything is non-standard, we alert the therapist, hey, there's something that you need to look at. We don't intervene on your behalf, but we're looking for the outliers, right, on that. And so they might have to check a few messages over the course of a month. Now, what we have seen therapists do, and what we hear a lot of, is they'll either at the start of the day or right before a visit, they'll go into Sarah and then look at all the responses and all the questions, because that is exactly how they were going to start the subjective portion of their visit. And so instead of asking, hey, Dave, like, how was your pain yesterday? Were you able to get outside on Monday? Did you do your exercises on Tuesday? They have all that data. And so they're actually able to get out from their screen quicker, and their patient is having a better experience. So depending upon whether it's a more extrinsically motivated, intrinsically motivated person, different, and it's part of our playbook for practice owners, of like how to handle objections and also how to pitch this to those two different camps of people. And so that's how we see, again, dependent upon the clinician, but $10 can add up. If you're doing 40 patients, billable patients per month, right? An extra $400 a month, extra $5,000 a year. That's nothing to sniff at. But to come back to your original question about, hey, maybe we should just have someone doing RTM. We've seen a couple practices do that, in particular with people coming back from maternity or paternity leave that want to spend a little bit of extra time either at home, typically at home, and saying, hey, we can make that work. Let's do these 3 days. You'll do 8 to 11 at home, and then come in at noon or after the lunch break. And what they're going to go after is the timed codes. So we haven't really talked about that much, but if you start saying, okay, well, if on average per clinician, I'm going to be doing, five patients per month, I'll do a time code. Well, then that starts to jump it pretty well. It's like, you know what? I actually think I'm going to do half my patients. I'll get at least one of these 20-minute thresholds in, especially if I have another PT that's their job. Well, then you're almost doubling your top line and doing some major increases to your bottom line as well. So the time codes can be really, really effective, whether you have it as just part of the normal, whether you have all your clinicians engaging in a platform, with their current panel, or if you have someone kind of off to the side as we call them in a couple of practices that have them, like headquarters RTM, basically headquarters PTs. So we've seen it. We seem to be successful. And in particular, when a clinician needs flexibility, this, like, you could not ask for a better opportunity, because telehealth can be hard. It can be really hard getting that patient onto a video call for a certain amount of time, right? That can be really difficult. Now, having it to where, as a clinician, I can be at home, I can do data review and then call patients, and to be able to get that synchronous interaction, well, that's low friction. It's also pretty high value to the patient, and it gives you a ton of flexibility as a practice owner to not lose some of those folks who they might.
Got it. What is this that you're highlighting here? Commercial multiplier 1.40. What is that?
So that's to get to what we see at some practices. So as I said, some practices have like $100 for that engagement code. So it's just based off of how much more they get paid than their Medicare rates, right? So if Medicare pays $57 and then their commercial plan pays $100, that could be like a 1.8. Let's just get an idea of what their commercial pays better than Medicare.
Got it. With the clients and customers that you guys have at Sarah Health, what percentage have which percentage have one or more individuals that they are like the headquarter PT or clinician or the RTM focused clinician, as opposed to what percentage of your clients where they are having every single therapist do this? Is there any delineation there?
Yeah, right around 10% is doing the headquarters PT model, with 90% doing the everyone acts on their own. So it's definitely the minority. Definitely the minority are doing the headquarters PT model.
Got it. And have you heard from any of your practice owner customers of some of their staff members revolting or any pushback on any of this, that this is extra work for them? Even if you're going to say, well, there's extra ways to be incentivized and have bonuses, that's all great. And again, if the downstream photo scores for the Medicare beneficiary or the patient improve, like, awesome. But what about pushback and resistance from any staff therapists or clinicians?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Gosh, it would be an absolute lie to be like, no, everyone's going to love this immediately and all your problems will be solved. There's absolutely pushback, and we actually love hearing it because it helps drive our roadmap for the future. So I know that one thing that we've recently unveiled with a few practices will be rolling out broadly. One big piece of feedback was, hey, I got to go to this other screen to be able to use Sarah, and it's really annoying to do so. And so now we have a Google Chrome extension that basically puts a widget on the side of any web-based EMR. So if you're on WebPT, you can actually have it right there, extend it out, use Sarah, put it back in, and never leave the WebPT screen. Same with Raintree, and we're adding the other EMRs as quickly as we can. So that's one thing. One was the documentation, where people were scared of the documentation, and so now that they have something completely copy and pastable, that's driven a lot of anxiety out of it. Then the last piece that we have gotten pushback on, and that we've also been able to address, is specificity to the patients. And so we have, I think, 45 unique clinical pathways. We call them flows. So that's everything from a patient who is getting treated for an orthopedic type injury by a manual therapy focused clinician versus exercise focused clinician, lymphedema, stroke, Parkinson's, neuro broadly. There's a bunch that I'm missing. Our head of clinical takes care of all that, and thank goodness he does. And we have the ability to create custom flows for providers with only about 30 minutes of their time. So that was another big pushback. It's like, this doesn't really fit my patients. Perfect. What data points do you want? And that's it. Just tell us what data points you want and a little bit of your practice setting. And then a week later, we'll have you up and running with a new flow. Because we spent 6 years getting really, really good at writing these questions. And so it's part of the secret sauce of why we're able to move so fast.
Excellent. Anything else to either briefly just screen share or anything that we maybe skipped over or haven't covered that would be kind of like the big pressing questions for practice owners that you guys get with like demos and all that?
I think we've covered a lot of it. This is some of the initial data that we're seeing from the small scale study that we're doing. Now, of course, happy to change all the assumptions based on specific practices, but running through with those assumptions and what we're seeing in terms of a decrease in visits with the same functional outcome, that could scare a lot of practice owners. Be like, oh man, I'm going to drop my visit revenue by 30%. Like that's scary. That's extremely scary. And I think that'd be fair. But there'd be two things you'd be forgetting about. One is margin. So RTM margin is just healthier than visit margin, right? Which comes as probably no surprise because you're having technology do the work for you. It's augmenting your clinician. It doesn't require their direct time, all those things, right? So that's one. But two is access. So if now I only need 8 visits to get Mrs. Smith better, it's going to be that much easier to schedule another patient and the visits that typically Mrs. Smith would have occupied over the course of that course of treatment, right? And how we're seeing some practices be able to take advantage of this is they're going back to their referral partners, so back to their primary care physicians and saying, hey, PT with us doesn't equal 12 visits in 6 weeks anymore. We can do really cool things like eval directly into remote monitoring for your patients. And then they'll ask the question, okay, will you send us more patients now? And so many primary care physicians think in that same box, right? Of like, oh, PT equals 12 visits in 6 weeks. And I know that, Mr. Smith is budget conscious and doesn't want to drive a lot. Like I'm just going to give him some ibuprofen and hope his back pain goes away. Right now, like, oh, wait. So as a practice, you can flex to the needs of the patient and be able to use technology as well to keep total cost of care down, but get someone better. Oh, that's fantastic. Like, of course, I'll send my low to mid acuity patients to you. And so, right now that's anecdotal, but the logic I think will bear out and at scale, and these practices are actually going to need to have more access. I don't know what it's like for you to if you tried to get a PT appointment yourself, but it's not always the easiest thing, and it's not as bad as some other physicians, but more access I think is good overall for all parties involved.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because I know that you and I discussed that some owners, once they learn more about this, that they might be hesitant that there's some cannibalistic experience here where you're losing out on your core service, which is the in-person visit. But I like your reminder that the remote therapeutic monitoring margins are better than in-person margins, which is very interesting. And then it potentially could open up the practice to, let's say they were great at marketing. They were doing a lot of social media marketing or on YouTube, whatever it might be, doing videos or whatever it might be in terms of generating interest across their state. Could they have Medicare beneficiaries that maybe the eval was done via telehealth and then the rest was over remote therapeutic monitoring using your service, like never came in contact with them? It's some other a beneficiary in the state. Is that even possible or no?
I don't think we've had a practice do that, and I don't know the exact answer to that, but I don't see why not. If it's whether it's a telehealth eval or an in-person eval, it's still an eval that kicks off a plan of care, right? So then you have an active plan of care. I don't even think it matters if the Medicare beneficiary is in the same state or not after that, because we looked into it for a practice of ours that, granted, they're seeing patients at the start in person, but it's a lot of snowbirds. They're out in New Mexico. They partner with a famous ortho come in for their total knee, right? Spend a month and bounce out back to the East Coast. And that practice in particular was like, oh my gosh, we were doing the phone calls, the emails, the text messages, the Zoom calls even with these patients because we wanted to, deliver this really high grade, amazing experience. And now they can get paid for it. And they were expecting some pushback from patients, but lo and behold, there was none. It's like, well, a lot of people don't like getting something for nothing. Like it just doesn't feel right, especially when you're in a clinic, you're seeing someone treat, even if it's just one-on-one. But if it's not, you see someone running around treating 3 or 4 people, like just, all these things as a patient, like we pick up on more than we might get credit for. And so the idea that I would ask for someone's time without having some way to pay for it, like it's just, it makes me feel disgusting. So knowing that there is a reimbursement pathway and like, oh, okay, you'll get paid for this. Fantastic. Well, then I don't feel as bad calling you to ask about something because I know it's not just you donating it to me out of the goodness of your heart.
Got it. Steven, this was awesome. Really appreciate your time. You guys can check out Sarah Health, sarahhealth.io, www.sarahhealth.io. What other place, whether it's LinkedIn, email address, any other place for the audience to check out your company, the offering, connect with you further?
Yeah, LinkedIn. So I'm posting at least once a week on there, especially what I hear from other owners and whether they're current customers or potential ones. So trying to give everybody access to the 10, 15 to 20 folks I'm talking to on any given week. And so, yeah, LinkedIn is great. And then on our website, I showed you that ROI model. You can actually do it yourself. So we have up to the top right, I believe it's the revenue calculator. You press on that, you can run your own numbers. And if it's something you want to talk more about, you can book a demo directly with us right afterwards, right down from there. So again, trying to make it as simple as possible. There's enough on practice owners and providers' plates as is today. And we hope to not be, at least to make it simple if they're going to add something.
Right. Awesome. Well, if you find this interesting and valuable and helpful, go ahead and subscribe to the Dave Kittle Show on YouTube as well as iTunes or Spotify. We'll catch you next time here on the show. Steven, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dave.
Hey, it's Dave Kittle. Are you a healthcare business owner or physical therapy practice owner who is looking to figure out your succession plan or exit strategy? We might be able to help. And in fact, we may be interested in acquiring your practice. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email at dave@conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE@CONCIERGE painrelief.com. Or you can call me at any time, 646-781-8884.